on simplicity. Looking at my life, 80 years of it, it seems that it's a story of a movement from simplicity to simplicity, with a lot of confusion and complexity in the middle of it. Of course, it's nostalgia and one can't remember, but I think that as a child, I lived in quite a simple world. There were my parents, there were people I loved, there were ayahs and nurses, there was pain and pleasure, but moral complexity, indecision, anxiety, loneliness, and confusion about what I was meant to be doing and who I was seems, I think, to be absent in my infancy, certainly in my first few years. And that's the picture that Wordsworth gives in his prelude. Heaven lies about us in our infancy. Not exactly heaven, but a simple world. And that continued to a certain extent until I was a teenager. Then things became complicated. Absolute certainties that one had about right and wrong and about how people operated evaporated, and you were left in doubt, increasing doubt. The simplicity of believing that God had created the world and that was all was right in the end began to disappear. We wrote essays which showed that almost every event there were arguments for and against it. Even people like Napoleon and dictators, there were reasons why they did things. So it became a morally and socially complex world. The relations with your parents became more complex as you grew away from them, and every aspect of your life. And you were taught to do this. You were taught at school, and then when I went to Oxford, that life is complicated, that there are many reasons, many chains of causation that lead to events. And the worst thing that you could be accused of by your tutors and others was for oversimplifying the complexity of reality. And indeed you became duty-bound in a way to mirror a growing complexity. As you knew more and more, read more and more books, thought more and more, you understood less and less. It became extremely complex. And then, so it went on until my retirement, I suppose, during my teaching period. And then during the years of retirement, I've begun to realize that the important thing is to simplify. As I often quote Einstein, make things as simple as possible, but not simpler. In other words, don't oversimplify, but bring things down to their essence, quintessence, and then you will understand them and be able to say something. And as I looked around at the world and the people I admired, I began to see that the great musicians, Bach, Handel, Mozart, or the great artists, Leonardo, Goya, and so on, and the people, the great writers, the poets, the metaphysical poets, what they all did was to simplify. They would take some complex phenomenon that they were studying or writing about or painting about and go down, right down into its essence, which was often very simple. And then they would dramatize or exaggerate perhaps that essence so that you got a strong picture of some feature, whether it was musical or painting or poetry. And this would be striking, and you'd realize that you'd learnt something new about the world because you got to its simple essence. This was obviously the aim of much mathematics and science, And I began to see this was also the aim of the disciplines I was interested in. And it applied in many fields. In one way, it applied to my writing. My writing became a little more complicated and complex as I became an academic, lots of footnotes and qualifications, perhaps, and on the other hand, and so on. The grammar and the style became more complex. And then towards the end of my time teaching, and certainly since I've retired, my writing has aimed at simplicity above all, the sort of style of William Hazlitt or George Orwell, which doesn't, the sentences tend to be short or varied length, and the thoughts are simplified, modelled on the simplicity, among others, of F.W. Maitland, the legal historians, whose style was very simple. It was based really on talking, as now, and in talking you speak in a simple way. You don't use long and complicated grammar and vocabulary, at least many people don't. I have friends who do. So in terms of the art of persuasion, which is writing, and likewise with filmmaking, I started by trying to make slightly complicated films, but gradually I learned that the best thing was just to make a very simple film of an event and let the camera roll and not make it too complicated. This also applied in studying phenomena, that when you looked at something which was huge, complicated, you could, if possible, try and get at its essence, its deep grammar, to use that metaphor. And an example was my work on China. For a long time I thought it was impossible to understand China because it's huge geographically, it's ancient historically, it's very diverse. And I thought, well, to describe this in the way that I'd been taught would take many volumes, and many volumes had been devoted to it. But then I looked at it more carefully, and I found that the difficulty of understanding it was that it was very simple, that the language is an ancient, simple language, that the political imperial system is a very simple, old system, that the system of promotion through education is very simple, that its ancient religions of Taoism and its philosophies of Confucianism and Buddhism are very simple. So actually you can write a short book which gets at the essence of not only Chinese civilization, but I did the same with European, the Anglosphere, Japan and Islam, because in each case you can simplify it down. Now, many of my colleagues would disapprove of this kind of activity. They would say, Alan, look, complexify, make life more complicated, or get at the essence of its complexity, and you will have achieved something. And of course that's worthwhile in its own way, but it's not my way. And that's also finally true of my own life. Making your own life simple in terms of eating, the regular rituals of your life, simplifying my gardening by leaving my garden to go wild, simplifying your friendships so that you don't feel ambivalent about people in every aspect. And of course, it's the aim of the great religions, the retreat of the later stages of Hinduism, or in Buddhism, and particularly Zen variant, which I admire, simplicity in every aspect, including your speech, clothing, thoughts, purifying it down to a wise old age of simplicity. There's a long way to go, but that's what I'm trying to do with simplicity. So simplify, but don't oversimplify. Thanks very much.